The first pottery ever made in the world is a lot older than most people think. When I was young, I always associated the emergence of pottery technology with the Neolithic revolution in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. It seemed to be a part of what they used to call the Neolithic package: domesticated plants and animals, ways of life like sedentary living in permanent settlements, and technologies like ceramic pottery. Perhaps I believed this in part because I grew up in Britain, where pottery arrives along with Neolithic farmers after they spread across Europe. The earlier hunter-gatherers of Britain did not use pottery, and so I assumed that was true for the rest of Mesolithic Europe too. But in fact, some hunter-gatherers of Europe were using pottery long before the arrival of Neolithic farmers. So how did European hunter-fisher-forager societies develop this technology before farming? Well, the first pottery vessels in the world were made thousands of years earlier. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, our Paleolithic ancestors would have taken note of the material properties of clay. They would have noticed the footprints of their prey as they tracked them through wetlands and riverbanks. You can imagine the feet of our ancestors squelching, their imprints filling with water but holding their shape until the next rains or high tide. The way that clay deforms and holds its shape was surely a notable and useful material property to many Pleistocene groups. Even as long ago as the Middle Paleolithic, Neanderthals in Italy may have used clay slabs around a hearth fire as heat-storing grills for cooking meat. At an Aurignacian site in Greece, dated to about 35,000 years ago, people used clay to line pits for cooking, an activity perhaps connected to the toasting of wild seeds. But these ancient clays were not heated to such high temperatures that they transformed into ceramics. Ceramics means clay forms fashioned into shapes, dried and deliberately heated at high temperatures with the intention of producing a durable product that remains in this form. And pottery means portable ceramic vessels. The first ceramics in the world were not pots and are very ancient. The oldest that we know of anywhere in the world came from what's known as the Pavlovian culture of Gravettian Europe, perhaps 28,000 years ago during the last glacial maximum. At sites like Dolní Věstonice in Moravia, the mammoth hunters of the cold north developed surprisingly complex societies using new technologies to create incredible, sophisticated artworks. And they also created many small figures of animals and people from clay and fired them in specially constructed ovens, also built from clay. The most famous example is the Venus of Dolní Věstonice, a ceramic figurine of a voluptuous woman. Delightfully, researchers discovered the fingerprint of a child had been left on the surface of the clay after it had been moulded and the surface smoothed, but before it was fired. The site of Dolní Věstonice had houses built from mammoth bone, and close by but separate from them was another structure some researchers called the shaman's hut, which had the clay ovens in it. Around this area, archaeologists found thousands of ceramic fragments, where animal figurines and simple clay balls had been shattered into pieces. Some people think damp clay balls were thrown into the fires so that expanding steam inside tiny air pockets in the clay would explode and shatter the bits all over, perhaps in some kind of theatrical shamanistic display. This wasn't the only European Upper Paleolithic site using clay and ceramics. There were layers of clay laid in hearths and around baskets or nets, leaving cord impressions for us to find today. Spanning the length of the Gravettian to the beginning of the Holocene, for thousands of years, these people understood and utilised the properties of clay and sometimes used it to create ceramics, such as Paleolithic cave paintings of animals like mammoth, rhino and horses. And excavations revealed a ceramic fragment just 6 centimetres in diameter that was thought to be the base of a cup or a fat-burning lamp. However, mineral residues found within the vessel suggests it was in fact a pigment pot used by the artists painting on the walls of the cave. If the radiocarbon dating is correct, it suggests this tiny paint pot, fired at 500 to 600 degrees centigrade, was created in around 16,000 BC. Of course, our record of the past is incomplete, but as far as we know currently, this ceramic pottery from Pleistocene Europe had no wider or long-term impact. Where they also built clay surfaces. It seems the site was used for specific economic activity, and so the pottery was created for this specific purpose. The pottery was coarsely made, with chunky, uneven walls up to 2 centimeters thick, and was fired at low temperatures between 400 and 500 degrees C. The low firing and extreme age of the pottery means the remnants are very fragile, so much so that only one pot could be reconstructed. The reconstructed vessel is 29 centimeters tall and has a round rim 31 centimeters in diameter and a pointed base. Very ancient pots from China, Russia and Japan often have these pointed or rounded bases. Research suggests round, pointed-based and porous vessels better stand the stresses of thermal shock, while pots with flat bottoms or sharp angles are more likely to fracture when directly heated. The shapes of the pots then can tell us something about how they were used. Both the interior and exterior surfaces had impressions, probably from cordage. Cord marks on the exterior could indicate it was made using a woven basket mould. Studies also show that decorations making the surface rougher by adding cord impressions, incisions or pits made handling heavy pots easier and improved both heat transfer and thermal shock resistance. These pots look to have been suspended over a fireplace, and chemical testing shows they were used to extract grease. They might have been used not only by testing chemical residues, but also by looking at the shapes and sizes and the thickness of the ceramics. Also, whether there are any soot residues from fires, how decorated they were, the temperature they had been fired at, and potentially the kind of temper used. Temper is the word for material added to the clay to stop it shrinking and cracking during drying and firing. People used all kinds of things from sand and crushed stone to organic materials like bone. Early Holocene Eurasian ceramics often used crushed shells, which makes sense as they often utilised resource-rich coasts, rivers, lakes and wetlands. In Finland, they also used asbestos as temper. It could be rather cold and wet up there, which was a problem for drying clay properly, and it might be that using asbestos temper helped this vital part of the process. As pottery use spread to northern China, the Russian Far East and Japan, it seems pottery was used primarily for a different kind of food. Organic residue analysis has revealed that, broadly speaking, it seems they were mostly used for aquatic resources.
This model asserts that the Vinca culture developed directly from the preceding Starchevo culture, whose representatives, in turn, came to the Balkans from Anatolia about 1,000 years before the rise of Vinca, bringing with them the skills of farming and a sedentary lifestyle. The first settlers of Vinca Belo Birdo were likely colonists from the broader Starchevo cultural sphere, living in tent-like dwellings with foundations dug into the lowest soil. It was they who laid the agricultural foundation on which the much more complex Vinca culture later flourished. The most famous proponents of this theory were the British archaeologist Colin Renfrew and the American researcher Ruth Tringham. For instance, in his 1969 work, The Autonomy of the Southeast European Copper Age, Renfrew argued that changes in pottery, settlement structure, and technology could be explained by internal social and economic processes, rather than an influx of new populations. This view was reinforced by the radiocarbon revolution, which provided independent dates and showed that many European achievements, including early metallurgy, were older than their supposed Eastern counterparts. The opposing hypothesis is that the Vinca phenomenon was caused by a second wave of migration from Anatolia to the Balkans. This view was shared by early researchers like V. Gordon Childe in his 1929 work, The Danube in Prehistory, and later supported by archaeologists like Garshanin. They based their arguments on the typological similarity between the material cultures of the Balkans and the Middle East. Vasage himself, with his theory of Ionian colonization, was an early, albeit extreme, proponent of this diffusionist thinking. This outdated model viewed prehistoric Europe as a passive periphery, receiving cultural impulses from a single cradle of civilization in the East. Thus, the dispute over the origin of Vinca was not just about pottery styles. It was more about whether prehistoric Europe was an active center of innovation, capable of independently creating complex societies. The Vinca culture became key evidence for the school of autonomy, demonstrating that complex societies could arise in Europe without direct stimulus from the East. The economic basis of Vinča society was a highly effective mixed subsistence strategy. Agriculture was intensified with the introduction of high-yield crops like bread wheat and the wider use of barley. Animal husbandry, with an emphasis on cattle breeding, also played a major role. This agricultural surplus supported a growing population and craft specialization, which led to the emergence of merchants. Long-distance trade networks were extensive, as evidenced by the presence of spondylus shells from the Aegean Sea, used to make luxury ornaments, and obsidian for sharp blades, imported from as far as the Carpathian Mountains. All this, according to scientists, led to a demographic boom. The population of the Vinča culture grew significantly, leading to the formation of some of the largest settlements in prehistoric Europe. Sites like Vinča Belo Brdo, Stublin, and Parcha are estimated to have had thousands of inhabitants. These were not chaotic villages, but dense, highly organized agglomerations. Houses were built of wood and clay, oriented in a uniform direction from southeast to northwest, and placed very close together, sometimes only 1 meter apart, with no yards, suggesting some form of urban planning. Some houses may have had 2 floors, ovens, and special pits for garbage. As for burials, things are not so simple here. Although burials are found within Vinča settlements, they generally belong to either preceding or succeeding cultures. For example, at the famous Vinča Belo Brdo settlement, a large grave was found, but it belonged to the earlier Starčevo culture. Copper Age graves were also discovered there, which also have no connection to the Vinča culture. As archaeologist Nenad Tasic notes, only about 120 deceased individuals have been found across 400 settlements, spanning 800 years. This circumstance makes any conclusions about a standard burial rite very difficult. Thus, archaeologists do not have a clear answer to the question of how the Vinča culture buried their dead. The absence of graves suggests that other ways of handling bodies may have existed, which, well, leave no archaeological traces. The most revolutionary achievement of the Vinča culture, however, was the independent invention of copper metallurgy, effectively marking the beginning of the Metal Age in Europe. Archaeological data from sites like Belovod and Pločnik in Serbia have provided reliable evidence of high-temperature copper smelting, dated to around 5000 BC. The Pločnik site is of particular importance. Excavations revealed a complex furnace with clay tube-like air vents, tuyere, and a chimney, a construction more advanced than those that appeared even centuries later. Among the artifacts found are numerous copper tools, such as axes and chisels. But the most astonishing thing is that a 2013 analysis of a tin-bronze foil found at Pločnik dated it to approximately 4650 BC, with a tin content of about 12%. This is the oldest tin-bronze artifact found in the world, pushing back the timeline for this complex alloy by 1500 years and proving its independent invention in Europe. This discovery fundamentally changes the history of technology. It not only refutes the long-standing diffusionist model, according to which metallurgy spread from a single center in the Middle East, but also points to the non-linear nature of technological progress. After the discovery of advanced tin bronze, around 4650 BC, there is a long hiatus. The next horizon of bronze in Serbia appears only in the 3rd millennium BC, and it's a completely different type. It's arsenical bronze. This means that this revolutionary technology was lost. Such a cycle of boom and bust refutes the simplistic progressive narrative of technological history and suggests that innovations in prehistoric times were quite fragile and could be lost due to social collapse. One of the most intriguing and hotly debated aspects of the Vinča culture is the abstract symbols inscribed on thousands of artifacts. The question of whether they represent the world's first writing system remains open to this day and forces a reconsideration of the very nature of literacy and the development of civilization. The debate was sparked by the 1961 discovery of the Târtăria tablets in Romania, which contain various symbols and, according to controversial data, may date to 5300 BC. If this date is correct, these signs predate the earliest Sumerian cuneiform by more than a millennium. The most prominent proponent of the writing theory was Maria Gimbutas. In works such as The Language of the Goddess, she argued that these symbols were not random decorations, but constituted a coherent system of sacred script used for religious and ritual purposes. She believed this script was part of a unified symbolic system, prevalent in the civilization she called Old Europe. There are other versions as well. Archaeologists Garashanin and Strayovich suggested a more mundane function, proposing that the symbols were simply potters or owner's marks. The main evidence for this is that some signs, especially on the bases of vessels, are unique. However, this theory cannot explain why many other signs are repeated across territories hundreds of kilometers apart and over entire centuries. Be that as it may, the most common view is that the symbols had religious significance, but did not encode language. They could have been abstract representations of deities, prayers, or vows made during domestic rituals. The fact that they are often found in garbage pits or buried under houses suggests that the objects were used in a ceremony and then ritually discarded. The controversy surrounding the Vinci symbols is, in essence, a dispute about the definition of writing itself. The modern Western perspective often links writing with administration and the phonetic recording of language. The case of the Vinci culture challenges this, suggesting that the earliest systematic use of signs in Europe may have been driven by ritual and ideology, not economics. The Mesopotamian model for the origin of writing is linked to the state's needs for accounting and administration. The Vinci symbols appear in a society lacking evidence of a centralized state or hierarchy. Therefore, if writing is defined purely as an administrative tool, the Vinci symbols fail the test. However, if the definition is expanded to include any standardized system of graphic signs used to communicate complex ideas within a community, then the Vinci system might qualify as a unique, non-administrative form of writing. Another source of intense scholarly debate is the thousands of enigmatic figurines found at Vinci culture sites. They have become a central element of the influential but rather controversial goddess theory. In her works, such as The Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe, Maria Gimbutas developed a powerful interpretive model. She argued that the vast majority of anthropomorphic figurines, which are predominantly female, represent a single supreme great goddess and her various aspects, such as the bird goddess with a beak-like face. Gimbutas saw these figurines as evidence of a goddess-centered religion that permeated the broader civilization she called Old Europe. She characterized this society as peaceful, sedentary, egalitarian, and matrifocal, that is, centered on women. This peaceful world, in her view, existed for millennia before being destroyed by patriarchal invaders from the east. Smaller figurines have holes, indicating they may have been worn as amulets or suspended from clothing. A crucial find from the Stubline site provides unique insight into a possible social function. A group of 43 figurines was found on the floor of a house in front of an oven. The figurines are nearly identical, with bird-like heads, except for a central, larger figure. 11 of them held miniature models of tools or weapons. Interpretations of this scene vary. They could be game pieces, a depiction of a clan council with the larger figure as the chief, or symbols representing a band of warriors setting out on an expedition for whom prayers were offered in their absence. Thus, the Vinci figurines are a classic example of the profound ambiguity of prehistoric art. The same objects can serve as evidence for both a peaceful feminist utopia and a society preoccupied with clan politics and warfare. The find at Stubline, with its armed figurines surrounding a central leader figure, strongly challenges Gimbutas's purely peaceful, religious interpretation, introducing themes of hierarchy, social structure, and potential conflict. It is likely that the figurines served a multitude of functions that varied depending on the context of time and place, and were part of a complex symbolic system that encompassed religion, social identity, politics, and daily life. After nearly 2 millennia of stability and innovation, the Vinča culture began to fade. Its mysterious decline and disappearance are the subject of debates considering both internal and external factors that led to the end of this great civilization. Well, not civilization, culture. Around 4500 BC, the Vinča network began to lose its cohesion. The long-distance trade networks that brought shells and obsidian collapsed. Life in the large settlements deteriorated sharply, and the territory occupied by the Vinča population shrank. A horizon of burned buildings, marking the final level of Vinča settlement at many sites, indicates a period of destruction and possible violence. Eventually, the culture gives way to subsequent Neolithic Copper Age cultures, such as the Gumelnica culture in the east and the Lengyel culture in the northwest. Some theories link the decline to environmental and economic factors. John Chapman, in his 1981 work, suggested that after 2,000 years of intensive agriculture, economic stress caused by declining soil fertility and resource depletion became the primary cause of the decline. This view is supported by Bogdan Bruckner, who argues that this economic stress led to a period of stagnation and, consequently, social tension, forcing large extended families to break apart into smaller ones. A dramatic, though highly controversial theory was put forward by Maria Gimbutas. She claimed that her peaceful, matrifocal old Europe was destroyed by a series of invasions by warlike, patriarchal, horse-riding Proto-Indo-European tribes. Although this theory is considered overly simplistic today, recent archaeogenetic studies have provided some support for the idea of a major population migration from the steppe into Europe during this period, associated with the spread of haplogroups R1a and R1b in Indo-European languages. In my opinion, a synthesis of these views is the most plausible. The end of the Vinča culture was not a single event, but rather a complex process of transformation driven by multiple factors. It is likely that Vinča society, already weakened by internal stresses, was unable to withstand the pressure from new groups migrating into the Balkans. The result was not a simple replacement, but a cultural transformation, during which elements of the Vinča heritage were incorporated into the new Neolithic societies that subsequently emerged.